Voilà, sans tarder, j'invite Dr Omera à me rejoindre. Thank you, Omera, for your responding to our invitation. Thank you to coming from so far away to share this day. Madame Omera Khan vient de Copenhague. Elle a dû faire une nuit à Madrid pour nous rejoindre. Donc, effectivement.
Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you. Bonjour. Now, from this moment onwards, I will speak the less elegant language of English, I'm afraid. But hopefully you will all follow me. It's my immense pleasure to be invited here today. Ali, thank you very much for the warm invitation. And it's an honor to present a keynote on a subject that has been so dear to my profession as a full professor in logistics and supply chain management, working primarily in the UK universities, but having taught all around the world. I've had the opportunities firsthand to really witness the dilemmas, the disruptions that we see all around the world. And when we think about, if we just start to consider the nature of all of these disruptions that surround us, there's no better time to come together and share and learn from each other on how we can navigate the challenges that we are facing in our industry. So welcome, everybody. I think this is going to be a really exciting day. We have an amazing agenda that's been put together by the organizing committee, some really brilliant speakers, and I'm really happy to be presenting the opening address. But before I begin, I would really like you to just take a moment and just consider what are some of the biggest disruptions that are facing you in your businesses. How do these keep you up at night? And indeed, ask yourself, what are you doing in your operations, in your supply chains, with your leadership to try and tackle some of these disruptions? Now, I'm not going to ask you to close your eyes and we're going to go into a yen moment, but if you could do that for a second, just think about the sheer complexity that I believe Ali presented in the introduction, that we live in a VUCA world. It's very volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and highly ambiguous. But guess what, guys? I've been saying this for 20 years. And in the 20 years, very little has changed. We've definitely become better and smarter at recognizing these disruptions. We've got much more sophisticated in our technology adaptations. But we are where we are, right? And I think one of the key points that I would like to really start off with is, look, don't be afraid of this volatile world we're in. Embrace it. We will be in a disruptive climate pretty much, I think, for the rest of times. It definitely gives me good business, right, as a speaker. But what I think we all are facing is the sheer, I guess, chaos of these supply chains, which I will talk to you about from a polycrisis lens. Now, I don't propose at all to have the right answers to all of our problems. But what I really do hope to do is inspire you today and challenge some of your current thinking. So over the next 40 minutes, and I know we're running late, but I'm here to give you my 40 minutes, share with you some of my perspectives on how we can challenge in this global world. So the agenda that we have is as follows. First of all, let's flash back over the last decade or so. The world is changing. We're living in an age of radical uncertainty. And there is no receding to this list of disruptions. They all have the potential to disrupt global supply chains. Second, I will review these disruptions and risks through the lens of the polycrisis, because it's very important to understand that we are no longer managing just single risk factors. It's actually the combinatory effect of all of these disruptions, all of these risks, that actually create the wider chaos in our global supply chains. I will then share with you the opportunities and challenges of technology, which I refer to as the technology paradox, because whilst there are significant benefits of technology innovations, the challenges of adoption and recognizing their full potential have not fully been realized yet. I will then share some ideas on why it's important to embrace an innovation mindset, and I will share some examples with you. And I will wrap up today by building the temple of supply chain resilience. Now, looking back at the last decade or so, it is really startling to consider the many disruptions that have been challenging our global supply chains. In fact, you could argue we're facing the most disruptive landscape of our generation. It is marked by an era of geopolitical tensions, climate change, and rapidly moving customer sentiments in almost every industry that we work in. Now, some of you can argue that from this list, hey, Omera, most of these risks are unexpected. They are outside in the wider supply chain. They're out of our control. But actually, all these risks are systemic. And that basically means that whilst a lot of the challenges that we see, at least on this slide here, are unexpected, most of them are systemic in nature, meaning that they occur because of a failure in our system. I mean, if we just look around us right now and look at some of the biggest risk of failures in supply chains anywhere, British car production is at its lowest for about 50 years. And that's because of a failure to source microchips on time. There's a shortage of food for pretty much the same reasons. Now, pre-COVID, we were working reasonably well with just-in-time arrangements. We had an ample supply of labor, and that's no longer true anymore. In a few months' time, I think, is it 21 weeks now, countdown to Christmas? Many retailers are grappling with the issues of making sure that toys are going to reach their stores in time for Christmas presents. And this is because of concerns of stockouts, partly caused by the delays in the Suez Canal, getting capacity on containers, and of course at the right prices given the geopolitical issues that we are facing right now. So now let's take a deeper look into the drivers that are influencing what we call the polycrisis. It's a disrupted landscape. So let's look at this through the lens. Because this concept, it opens up the threads to which you can begin to see the connections that when they overlay each other, they become bigger problems in our industry, right? I'm looking around the audience now and I can see a few heads saying, yep, we are facing this. Now, going forward, it's reasonable to assume geopolitical relationship will continue to remain tense, and some supply chains will be more shaped by political choice rather than by economics, and by the increasing impact of climate change. Now, if the last 3 years have taught us anything, is that we are now at an inflection point. Technology, of course, is a great enabler. Sorry, I can see. Do I need to speak a little slower? Is the speed good? Okay. There's basically evidence that we're seeing around us now of a recalibration of our global sourcing arrangements. We're seeing slight power shifts away from China. India, Mexico, Southeast Asia are all emerging as alternatives, offering competitive cost structures, large labor pools, at scalable capabilities in almost all industries. Now, as we all stand at the crossroads of this evolving global economy, the resilience and the adaptability of our supply chains has never been more critical. Now, for logistics providers, many of who are sitting in this auditorium today, this really means that we have an increasing demand to adapt to new ways of flexibility. And all around us today, we're seeing business models change, paradigms changing, The entire logistics landscape is shifting. And if we just take a second and think about our consumers who are becoming much more environmentally minded, companies are shifting towards circular business models, supply chains as a service, where we think about the sharing of assets as opposed to ownership of assets. And that's one way we're achieving greater agility and flexibility in our global supply chains. We're moving towards demobilization or reverse logistics. How do we ensure we continue to green our supply chains for our customers who are tackling Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions, and the lists go on. So, just an example of the connectivity of these polycrisis lens. Let's just take a moment and look at this chart. This one taken by some colleagues from Zenita, a consulting based in Denmark that does insights for companies. This shows the impact that rerouting to avoid the Houthi attacks is having on the rise of carbon emissions. As you know, in the Red Sea, we've got this ongoing armed conflict that's causing the carriers to have to go around the southern tip of Africa. This is an additional 3,500 nautical miles, 10, 12, 14 days additionally at sea, which has ramifications for delivery time, inventory, and availability of working capital. And this example is just many of such examples showing you that even when we have the best intentions in meeting our sustainability targets, a geopolitical disruption comes along, smacks us in the face, knocks us out because we have limited options to divert. We've got to get the goods to the consumers, whatever the climate agenda. Here we see a second example of the polycrisis. The interdependencies of the polycrisis, where global regulations are pushing supply chains more towards localization. And now the pace of regulations is being introduced to global economies in a very, very fast pace. The EU, of course, is driving the global momentum, but the rest of the world is also following fast. Let's just take the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act, which basically sets the target to import not more than 65% of the EU's annual consumption of each strategic raw material at any relevant stage of the processing from a third country by 2030. Or let's think about the Deforestation Act. And this basically stipulates that products that do not originate from recently deforested lands to have contributed to forest deregulation and so forth, degradation. So this and the Inflation Reduction Act, which is giving incentives to American companies to make more within America, is also pushing the business paradigms in supply chains further and further. This naturally segues into what we call sovereign supply chains. Now, during the pandemic, it seems a long, long time away now, right? Do you remember those days? Holy moly, right? It's nice to travel without face masks, I can say that. But during the pandemic, the supply chains that had previously been considered trustworthy, they were found to be fragile. This led to a change of focus on what we call supply chain sovereignty. And this is basically a company's ability to maintain control over its supply chain, minimize dependence on external suppliers as much as it can. And it involves ensuring that critical aspects of the supply chain, such as sourcing of raw materials, manufacturing, distribution centers, are all managed in-house or they are being managed by trusted partners. And now, this is probably a lot more complex than I'm making it sound, but trust has eroded internationally. We're seeing a lot of the rise of borders. We saw that with Brexit and the increased prevalence that we're seeing, the other geopolitical tensions we're not talking about as much, right? Where we're seeing a large number of protectionism going on, particularly in Europe. The USA and the Australian governments have created supply chain councils. And I did my PhD in supply chain risk and resilience 20 years, almost to the day. Like, finally, governments are catching up to this idea we call supply chain resilience, right? We are trying to ensure that our supply chains are not just robust, they can withstand the tsunami, but they're also resilient. How do we embrace the energy that comes from a tsunami and do even better next time? So sovereign supply chains could change business trade significantly. Of course, there will be winners and there will be losers. For example, Mexico is already benefiting as the backdoor to the US from China. So, to summarize, at this stage of the presentation, supply chains must be adaptable and flexible. And perhaps one of the most powerful ways in which enhanced supply chain resilience can be achieved is what we call supply chain structural flexibility. And basically, structural flexibility, a little bit like these towers, this reflects our ability to adapt, reconfigure the architecture of our supply chain, our organization, in order to respond to this VUCA world that we live in. Both supply side and the demand side, it's like a tug of war. We're being pulled in both directions all the time. So while we're being in this tug of war, we need to be able to converge. We need to adopt a real options approach, keep all our options open. And this basically means that in the VUCA world, we don't want to set all our decisions in concrete. Let's consider thinking about much more agility in our supply chains, which gives us the ability to respond to this unpredictable and uncertain climate that we've got to navigate. Options allow us to recognize where the best decisions can be taken in an uncertain world. Now, they may not produce the most low-cost solutions, but they will ensure that the supply chain is capable of changing when the conditions change. Now, let's talk about the fourth industrial revolution. This is the era that characterizes the advancement of technology into every area of our lives. The speed, the scope, the impact of these digital transformations are beyond anything that we have witnessed in the past. From in the warehouse, on the roads, and in the skies, we are seeing technology being embraced in every element of the logistics process. So in the warehouse, we are seeing increasing adoption of automation and robotics. This is already a $6 billion plus industry. On the roads, we're seeing the autonomous vehicle technology is readily available. But the framework around using and the adoption of that technology is still under development. So we're not really seeing the widespread adoption of automated vehicles right now. We're not seeing driverless trucks, for example, readily available as once predicted. But what we are seeing is increasing adoption of platooning. And platooning is where two or more trucks together travel in a digitally connected network, such that trucks 2, 3, or 4 are basically following and mirroring what that lead truck is doing. And then there's the third area of digitalization. Digitalization hardware, which is up in the sky. I know I saw a sign coming in, it's not allowed here, the drones. But drone deliveries are not just technically feasible, they are now becoming economically viable. And we are seeing companies like FedEx, DHL, UPS, all doing last mile deliveries using drone technology. And then with all of this, let's just throw in technologies like blockchain, cloud computing, mobile computing, software as a service. This means we don't need to have investments in software and hardware. We can provide supply chain as a service, almost on a pay-per-basis subscription model. So with all of these technologies, they are readily available, they're easily accessible, and they are now much more affordable. Now, digitalization is a journey. And in many cases, it's a journey we will never come to the end of. it's a forever journey. It's a forever ride. Every company must be on this digital journey. And if they're not, they will be left behind. And that's probably not a good place to be. But there is also a lot of hype. Is all this AI, all this technology, all these buzzwords, is it really an opportunity or is it just a challenge? Like, I did say I don't have all the answers, even as a professor. We get things wrong. I'm, for one, not crazily fixated on all the technologies. In fact, in recent years, I have been very frustrated. Companies jumping so fast to the next shiny thing that shines so bright, only to realize, why did we invest in SAP? Do you remember those days? Why did we invest in cloud computing and so forth, right? So it's very important that we understand with the technologies that they're just an enabler. They're an enabler to make our supply chains more efficient, more effective, to improve visibility and so on. But I do believe that there's more opportunity than there is a challenge. So there's a real frenzy going on right now. And one of the biggest issues is FOMO. This is the fear of missing out. And this is what is fueling this frenzy about artificial intelligence. We have super inflated expectations of what it might be able to do, both good or bad. And I think it's really time to take a breath. Right? Pause. Think. Just how do we recalibrate? What are the expectations around artificial intelligence to our business? What can it help us with? How will it help us do that? And what is the timeline that is realistic for these expectations? We seem to have this huge surge right now. Let's all jump on the AI bandwagon. Lots of businesses not having a clear roadmap, how to get there, what are even we getting to? And then they end up creating islands of excellence. We've got to beware of creating these islands of excellence. Did we even consider our consumers were looking for self-service checkouts? Back home in Manchester, where I come from, in case you didn't pick that up with the accent already, and don't start asking me which football team I support, the answer is one brother supports City, the other brother supports United. Depending on who I'm watching with, I support that team, right? So now getting back to technology. Unfortunately, there's also the downside of technology. Around 10 years ago, I did a lot of work in cyber risk and resilience. And I used to stand in auditoriums like this with supply chain professionals asking me, Omera, this is all really interesting stuff, but what the hell has cyber got to do with supply chains? I was hoping you guys were going to gasp or shriek or laugh at that point. It has everything to do with us. Maersk, an organization that I've been working with greatly, faced one of the biggest cyber risk disasters. Today, it's probably one of the leading companies in managing cyber resilience. So there is this downside. We have to be aware about it. Our cybersecurity professionals have to deal with the potentially bad actors who are also capitalizing on the power of artificial intelligence. Where will it lead? I'm really not sure. But Gartner, who you may have heard of, they have published a study. It was the actual technology research group, and they developed a model called the technology hype cycle. And this is where Gartner plots emerging technologies on typically what happens before they actually become realistic applications in business. And the 3 key phases over time this typically takes is 3 to 5 to 7 years to get through this cycle. So I wonder, where is artificial intelligence at the moment? Can anybody take a guess? Where do you think we are? At the peak of, sorry, I was supposed to click that. We're at the peak of inflated expectations, absolutely. So this basically reflects what I said about the AI frenzy, where everybody's talking about AI, everybody's excited about AI, but we're really not sure what, how, where, and when. It's probably going to take another 3 to 5 years before we see the commercial realization of how artificial intelligence can actually help us. Now, picking on basically trying to super guess what are the kind of technologies that really shake our world. You know, we all know the really cool dude called Bill Gates, right? Well, he had this philosophy of predicting the impact of technology. And his view was that when we are predicting the impact of new technology, like 10 years ahead, we massively, massively underestimate the impact of that technology. So as we're coming of age, artificial intelligence, I would argue, is almost impossible to see how it's going to impact us in 10 years' time from now. But if we adopt Bill Gates' philosophy, then we can expect that in the next 18 months, it's probably going to be massively underachieved. So on that basis, if we think about life-changing technological innovations or revolutions, these have all happened in my lifetime, probably in most of all of your lifetime. Amazon is only 30 years old. Google is 26 years old. Think about how they have changed our lives. The biggest one for me is 17 years old. In January 2007, Steve Jobs stood up at a developers conference in San Francisco. And there he held up something like this. It looked like this. And he basically said, "This will change everything." And my world, it has changed everything, right? We think Kodak was disrupted. I was just considering the other day, I watch this Wake Up to Money program every morning, which I stream from the UK. They were talking, iPhones have even disrupted the wallet industry, right? Because we have everything on the Apple Wallet now, right? Who would have thought? But in just 17 years, our lives have dramatically been changed. And now we're here at 2 years old with mainstream artificial intelligence called ChatGPT. How do we possibly imagine how this will change everything? But change it will. There's absolutely no question about it. Artificial intelligence is going to change our life, our businesses, our professional life, and our personal life. But I won't go into details on how that will change. Now, innovation is fundamentally key to all of this. And innovation doesn't just come from technology, right? Innovation, it's a key ingredient for success in our global supply chains. It keeps us on this constant heightened awareness. And we need that. We need to constantly be almost on our tiptoes, right? Like searching for the next big opportunity. And innovation, fundamentally, academically, it's all about creating economic value, social value, or environmental value. And this is all through the application of new ideas. But what I'd also like to share with you is innovation can also be disruptive. Anybody in this room heard of Professor Clayton Christensen? Hands up, anyone. We're getting warm and friendly now, right? No one's heard of Clayton Christensen. Well, if you'd been to my program, Masters in Logistics Supply Chain in London, you would have heard a lot about Clayton Christensen. Great guy, Harvard professor, who basically created the concept of disruptive innovation. And disruptive innovation are basically these ideas that we can basically bring into the forefold, make them accessible, make them affordable, and available to an even larger market. Now, I've been thinking a lot about disruptive ideas recently, and I've been thinking a lot about disruptive ideas from the context of sustainability. And the conclusion that I have come to is that we may need to think about some fresh ideas, some disruptive ideas on challenging our business models if we're really, really going to shift the needle on sustainability agenda. Because as I've just shared with you right now, is that when we hit geopolitical issues, then the sustainability agenda takes a backseat. Hands up, everybody in the companies who are doing this right now. We're saving the ships, right? We're making sure our consumers are getting the products. We're not slow sailing. We're not slow shipping, right? We're not telling the consumers, hey guys, wear your t-shirt for a little bit longer. Now, for me personally, one of the biggest, I guess, persuasive signs to the current approaches to sustainability came from an article that I read in the Harvard Business Review. Some of you may have heard of management thinker John Elkington. Now, anybody? John Elkington was the founder of the concept called the triple bottom line. So the Venn diagram you saw earlier of profit and so forth, right? So he created the triple bottom line concept 25 years ago. And in a Harvard publication just a couple of years back, he recalled that managed concept. Now, this is completely unheard of. We hear of product recalls, Mattel, Toyota. We do not hear about management recalls. So as soon as I found this article, this was a couple of years back, I'm always researching, the next best thing for my keynote speech. I was like, holy moly, right? This is something that is really key, because the triple bottom line concept was really supposed to give management thinkers the opportunity to take a broader approach to sustainability. And what we're seeing is an accelerated expansion of sustainability agenda, from now responsibility to resilience to regeneration. Basically, John Elkington got really ticked off. He said, I'm recalling it because you guys are taking the mickey out of this. This is not working. He wanted to think about an entirely new approach to sustainability. So really, it was a symbolic decision that he was making. Now, what we need to think about is that we're living in global supply chains. There's no more fascinating time being a professor. Business models are changing, paradigms are changing. I mean, even if we just look in our logistics industry, we're seeing consolidations take place. DSV's acquisition of DB Schenker just a week or so back. We're seeing new alliances being formed. The Gemini Alliance, one speaker, the Alliance, another one. We're seeing a lot of diversification, consolidation in our industry that is taking place. So these are some of the business models that we're seeing. But I want to stick to the sustainability agenda for my presentation, in that we are shifting the needle more towards this evolutionary and regenerative economy. And when we think about that, presentation's taking a little slow, but what we've got to think about is what are the kind of challenges that this brings to the forth. We've got to think about, when we're designing our supply chains, we need to think about de-risking them on the drawing board. 80% of the risks and costs in our supply chain are tied up at that very early stage. So particularly when we're thinking about consumer goods industries, there's a significant impact that they can make on that drawing board. And anybody interested to learn or read more about this, my second book on product design and supply chain is all about this, that the supply chain begins on the drawing board. But sticking to this cradle-to-cradle idea, we're moving from linear supply chains to circular supply chains. What the hell does that have to do with logistics industry? It has everything to do with the logistics industry. There is massive opportunities for us to consider changing. We are not just one-way logistic flows, but we are several flow. We are multi-directional. There'll be an increased flow of reverse logistics, refurbishing, remanufacturing, recycling, and so forth in order to support the circular economy. So I did say I wanted to talk about disruptive ideas. And, I've been living in Denmark for 10 years. I don't speak a word of Danish, but if anybody has heard the Danish language, you will probably understand why. Now, one example of a disruptive innovation also comes from John Elkington. He talks about green swans. Now, I'm pretty sure everybody in this room has heard about black swans. Yes, I'm glad to see that. Black swans from Nassim Taleb's book. But the green swan John Elkington's concept is about delivering exponential progress in the form of economic, social, environmental wealth creation. It's about giving breakthrough innovations. Now, as I said, coming from Denmark, I want to share a story with you of Hans Christian Andersen. Maybe you don't know the author, but you've probably heard the story of the ugly duckling that grew up to be a beautiful swan. Now think about innovative ideas. A little bit, they start off like an ugly duckling. And whatever you might think of Elon Musk, I mean, he's always creating chaos. So forget the character called Elon Musk. Let's just think about his invention, the innovation, Tesla. So just think of Tesla in your mind while I take you through this journey of how an ugly duckling becomes a green swan. It's this adoption, right? He was initially rejected. His idea when he went to the investors to support him on the journey was rejected. So think about this in your mind. Think that people will never leave combustion engines. He swam along, this little ugly duckling with gray feathers. He believed in himself, and he thinks responsibly. Now think of Elon Musk's decision to start Tesla and producing the electric cars himself because no other car manufacturer would invest. Then came the breakthrough. It started growing into this beautiful green swan. It was very difficult to ignore. Then we saw replication. So now think that other car manufacturers decided to jump on that bandwagon and make that transition to electric vehicles as well. Then we come to resilience. It now has the army of green swans, but it has to solidify and protect itself against possible disruptions, including the wider systemic risks that I talked about earlier. Otherwise, it may fail. So think about charging infrastructure. We may have created the car, but if we don't create the charging infrastructure, we're not resilient. And finally, the last point is regeneration. This is where we all have aspirations to be. We are not there yet. The entire system will shift from a linear resource-consuming system to an increasingly circular, regenerative system that can sustain itself without harming our planet. So all I'm saying to you here from this lovely little story is don't be blindsided by ugly ducklings in your companies. Give them the chance. Because what looks really weird, really strange today could become tomorrow's breakthrough innovation. Okay, folks, you've been very patient with me, and I come to pretty much the last slide of my presentation. Second to last. Now, there's a lot of topics and themes that we've discussed here, and fundamentally what we are striving to achieve is, from a polycrisis lens, we have learned we can no longer just risk manage, we have to embrace resilience. So, many years back, my time in Cranfield University, we developed what we call the Temple of Supply Chain Resilience. And building this temple is increasingly important for all organizations. It cannot be created overnight, but what I'm hoping is it's going to give you some inspiration on how we can involve all areas of the business, develop an effective strategy, and it will impact everything from product and service design to the cultures and mindsets that are required within the business. So, first of all, we have to develop the foundation of an effective supply chain strategy because this impacts the risk profile of your supply chain. The supply chain strategy has to have a clear linkage to the competitive strategy of the business. You cannot create a supply chain strategy without knowing what we're competing on. And I can see some people laughing at me and smiling at me saying, what is she? Trust me, there are many companies that do not have a competitive strategy. They have a corporate strategy. They then think they have a supply chain strategy. It doesn't work. You have to have the clear direction. Because this will define the processes, the infrastructure, the information systems, the supply chain organization, the people within the supply chain, how they all combine together. Your flow needs to be product design for supply chain management. Supply chain risk is embedded during this very critical stage of products. Consider, for all of those who are in manufacturing and so on, consider the raw materials that are going to be used. Where will they be sourced from? Consider if the product can be configured late or can it be considered closer to the customer. Now, let's start building the pillars of our temple. First, agility. Agility gives us flexibility, visibility, and velocity within your supply chain operations. Second, we must build supply chain collaboration, not just externally, but also internally. A silo mindset creates more divisions. A silo mindset doesn't let us reach our North Star. The more you collaborate, the greater resilience you can achieve. Thirdly, let's create the supply chain risk management culture. Very important. Allow people, when people are making a decision, they've got to consider the impact of that decision on the overall risk profile of the supply chain. So, for example, in terms of cost vs responsiveness, the cheapest alternative may not be the least riskiest. The last pillar, supply chain design. Consider the location and the network that you use, the equipments that you use. For example, global sourcing will change the risk profile. So, for example, a factory producing raw materials in a part of the world with a geopolitical upheaval, we can almost say that's all around the world, it's almost universal now, but have you considered the risk? Make sure you ask the right questions and you understand the impact of all of those decisions. Now, let's start to build the roof of supply chain transparency. Ensure that you have high levels of transparency across your product flows and network. Transparency is required to reassure all that the supply chain is operating effectively. And this requires connected information systems, good communication, so that we all have a clear understanding of the supply chain. Finally, the roof of the temple is continuous monitoring and intelligence. Make sure your employers, your suppliers, your customers have ways of keeping you informed of issues that you can act upon quickly, hopefully quicker than your competitors. So you can always keep ahead of securing the resources that you need to keep your supply chain operational. So, to recap what I have covered in my session today, with 2 minutes to go. First of all, I shared with you the risks that have scarred our landscape over the last decade. And through the lens of the polycrisis, I explained the drivers of disruptions. When they all pile on top of each other, they create this uncertain climate that we need to navigate our supply chains through. And it's this causation effect of sustainability, geopolitical, and sovereignty in supply chains that creates the biggest paradox for all of us. Then I talked about the technology paradox and the AI frenzy. Who knows where we will be in the next 10, 5, actually, who knows where we will be in 12 months' time. But what we do know is innovations can help us improve and challenge or even disrupt the status quo. We then discussed innovation and disruptive innovations, and we discovered not to be blindsided by ugly ducklings because they could become your next breakthrough disruption. So dare to be a disruptor. And then I wrapped up with building the temple of supply chain resilience. This is a useful decision-making framework that my colleagues and I developed at Cranfield University many years ago, but I think it's still increasingly important and valid for all organizations that are planning to navigate the supply chains in this disruptive and uncertain world. So I thank you all for your attention this morning, for your warm welcome, and I wish you all to enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's nice. Really.